Okay. Hello, everyone. My name's Lucy Spicer, and I come from an organisation called Shout Out UK. And today we're going to be doing something a little bit different than it says on the tin. So today I'm going to focus on media literacy and climate change, and then also I'm going to promote the Hackathon challenge that has been making the rounds recently across secondary schools in the UK and further afield. Just going to be talking about the different ways we can interact with each other and kind of the core components of media literacy and what is the problem right now with media literacy, climate change, and how we can solve these issues. So we're going to go through some of the negatives of media literacy in the beginning, and then we're going to hopefully end on a big, massive positive and how we can solve these solutions. So I'm just going to jump straight in to kind of explaining what is the point today and what is going on. So before we start anything, we need to kind of outline what media literacy is. So media literacy is kind of the ability to access, analyse, evaluate, and create media in a variety of forms. And today everyone needs to become more efficient at filtering what they see and hear. And this is particularly essential when dealing with online. Now, we're quite different to how we were in the past. Everything, all of our lives are now online, and that becomes a problem when it used to be that people didn't know that climate change existed, and then the scientists said that climate change did exist and there was a big problem, and we're all very aware that there's some issues that come out of it. But now we have the problem with people online basically skeptics sharing widely misinformation, disinformation, or propaganda, or however you like to say it, fake news. They kind of spread this idea that climate change is a myth, or climate change, you don't need to worry about it now, we can just worry about it in the future. And that's where we kind of have the problem starting. So what we're going to do today is going to look at different ways and different types of components of media literacy and climate change and how we can sort of go through these options. So when using social media, the first sort of question you want to ask yourselves should always be, is this real or not? And I think this is a really big point of reference for everyone to take on, young and old, is that we kind of live in a post-info era, meaning that information is just coming at us, every second of the day. We're on Instagram, we're on social media, we're logging onto Google, researching things, and that's a lot of information to take in. But what we often don't forget is that there are facts, there are opinions, and there are, real sort of Twitter posts, and there are fake ones. And this is the big problem we need to do. So kind of when you're starting social media and you're starting to engage with climate change and to engage with all these rules, you kind of want to tell yourself, right, I need to be really aware of what's going on, and I need to think, is this real or not? So that should be the first step to anyone's sort of understanding of climate change, is answer, this question in your mind at all points. Next, we need to kind of get the wording right. So fake news is kind of what people are aware of when they talk about media literacy. Everyone's aware that fake news exists. There's lots of fake news about climate change out there, lots of weird, wonderful stories that people discuss. And we kind of want to avoid using the word fake news now. There's been a bit of a change in the situation with Britain, with people abroad, that we're all going to try and move away from the idea that we just use fake news, because a lot of people kind of get fake news a bit distorted. They're not really sure what fake news means, and that is a huge problem. So the idea is that we try and move away from this. Why have we moved away from this? Is because certain people, certain high profile people, tend to say the fake news media. And again, what they're talking about is that fake news is something that you don't agree with. So a lot of people who don't believe in climate change will just say, scientists are spreading fake news. Scientists are telling us this, and it's not right. And that's the problem. So fake news is kind of being cottoned on as I don't agree with this, I'm just going to call it fake news, and then I don't have to deal with it. So we kind of want to move away from this. We want to try and elaborate on what we're feeling here. And that's the sort of big question is how do we differentiate between news that we just don't agree with and news that is actually false or has been, purposely created to fool us. And that's where we kind of move on to the next sort of steps of trying to understand, different scenarios and different wording for when we find something that is false. So we've had a recommendation to the UK government. And the idea of this is that the term fake news should be replaced. And it says here in a nice, tidy quote, we recommend that the government rejects the term fake news and instead puts forward an agreed definition of the words misinformation and disinformation. Malinformation as well comes into it, but they're more focused on misinformation and disinformation. And then with this shared definition and clear guidelines for companies, organizations, and for governments to follow, there will be shared consistency. And again, what this means is that we can, regulate and enforce. I'm sure we've all seen recently, Twitter has been labeling certain things quite heavily as misinformation with the US elections, and Facebook has also come across trying to label things that are anti-climate change. And there's been a lot of movement by social media companies to try and deal with this climate change purpose at the moment. So again, the idea is that we can, if we have consistent words, misinformation and disinformation, everyone knows what they mean, then we can more easily actually regulate these when you see them. And that's something that is really essential currently right now when everyone's online and at their homes and having to think about things. So again, we really want to move away from the term fake news at this moment. So what we have instead is, again, I've been mentioning them, disinformation and misinformation. Now, what these mean are quite simple. So disinformation is information that is false, but is deliberately created to harm a person, social group, organization, or country. So someone has sat down and intentionally created something that is false. They know it to be false. They're deliberately doing this. They're aware that it's false and they're spreading it. They're spreading it on the internet. And lots of people and companies are engage in this because there's not much regulation on the internet. Misinformation is more common, I'd find, on the internet. It's information that is false, but it's not created with the intention of causing harm. So again, you have some people that might just share something they haven't fact checked. They're not doing it intentionally to harm anyone, but they're sharing it anyway, and then they're spreading misinformation. So there's two steps to this. Again, intent to harm, and no intention of causing harm, but still sharing information that is false. And these are the kind of two big points that you want to make when thinking about online behavior. So again, I'm going to keep repeating this so everyone's got it. Information that is false and deliberately created to harm a person, social group, organization, or country. And this is disinformation. So we've got a bit of, there's a lot of disinformation that's been talked about heavily recently. And the idea is that, scientific evidence from climate change became clear, and we had lots of carbon producers. But what they did is they developed or participated in these big carbon producers, so Saudi Aramco, BP, Chevron, all the fossil fuel companies. They kind of developed, or at least participated in, campaigns to kind of sow confusion and block policies designed to reduce heat trapping. They kind of engaged in this sort of behaviour on a wide scale, kind of spreading disinformation, saying there's no need to worry about fossil fuels. There's not much going on here. We all need to calm down. And that's something that a lot of people are aware of. And some people say it's not disinformation, they're just kind of trying to deal with their own issues and they're just trying to be a business. But there's been a lot of, problematic behavior that's happened with them. And we need to kind of be aware of this to fight against them. So when we're dealing with, these big companies that are big carbon producers, we kind of want to be very careful and really look at how they're reacting online. More recently, they have been taking a bit of change and been talking about individual responsibility. So what we can do as people, like how can we help? But again, we still need to be reminded that yes, people are carbon producers as well, but also so are these big companies, and they do need to take some of that on them and think of new innovative ways to kind of develop that, especially for the future and with all the recent needed for change that we have. So again, so you've got disinformation from big companies, and that's kind of one of the core things at the moment that has been spread around. So I kind of did this as well, and this is just kind of the big question is which company is the most responsible community for the most carbon issues, spreading carbon into the atmosphere. And we've got kind of, 3 of these here. And again, we have Saudi Aramco. And you can easily find how much carbon these fossil fuel companies produce and what is going on compared to, individuals, and how we can kind of, work together to try and find new innovative solutions and ideas for people for these big companies as well, to kind of change their way and become more renewable or invest in renewable with their profits that they gain from fossil fuels. There's a lot of positivity that can come out of this, but we need to first be aware that companies are at fault as well. So someone has quoted this quote here, which says, fossil fuel companies' leaders knew that their products were harmful to people and the planet, but still chose to actively deceive the public and deny this harm. And this was the same, if you think of another parallel, this was quite similar in terms of cigarettes. So before we were all aware that cigarettes are bad for us and they're really bad for our health, before that, it was, I'm quite young, but I don't remember the advertisements, but I was told by people in the sort of 70s, 60s that it was considered normal. People just had a cigarette and there was no problem with it. And this has changed. The cigarette companies engaged in disinformation. They lied to everyone, and then the fossil fuel companies in the past have done this as well. But people are becoming more educated and more engaged. So we kind of need to work together to try and actively support them in moving away from this. So we don't want, we want them to be aware that we're all aware now that fossil fuel companies cause carbon dioxide and it causes a big problem. So how can we engage with them to move to a more positive? And that's the big question that we're kind of answering. So again, there's been some interesting findings from, I think it was the concerned scientists, which say, they acknowledge the main findings of climate science now. So, we've got to 2020 and they're finally saying, okay, you're right, climate science has proved this. And many do say that they want to cut emissions. But again, they say that on the face of it, but they still spread misinformation designed to deceive policy. So on the face of it, they'll say, yes, we want to cut it, but then they'll engage with supporting policies that don't want to cut it. So you have a bit of a problem of deception going on. So again, we really need to be quite focused on if they say they're going to do something, this needs to be backed up by evidence. And this is quite hard to do when online. So if BP is tweeting this, that they're more looking to cut their emissions, then we need to say, okay, how are you going to do this? Not just take it on the surface and say, okay, agreed, that's perfect. And that's kind of one of the things that we want to think about and do. So this is quite an important point here in ensuring that deception doesn't continue and that we don't just take what they tweet or what they Instagram as full fact. We actually need a proper policy put in place by these big companies. So that was disinformation. Again, it's the big companies that engaged in sort of, spreading false information. They were aware that their, fossil fuels cause problems, but they spread things with the intention to kind of, and we say it's caused harm because it has caused harm around the world. And that's where the intention to cause harm. Some people may say, oh, they didn't intend to cause the absolute widespread harm. You can't blame climate breakdown on them fully, but I think we can say that they definitely are more focused on profits and things like that. So we need to kind of, again, work with them to move in a different direction. Next, we have misinformation, and this is information that is false, but is not created with the intention of causing harm. And this is kind of what we all engage in. At one point or at a time, someone, especially because we're all going on Facebook quite young now, we're going on, it says you should be 13, but people have been known to go on a bit younger, even though you shouldn't. And we've been engaging with this. So even from the age of 13, you can accidentally spread misinformation to if you're 80, and you can also spread misinformation. So there's a bit of a problem here. We're spreading false ideas, but we didn't intend to cause harm, and that's an issue. But Facebook is trying to help. And again, this is where you have to think, what I'm thinking is more broadly, is kind of the politics of climate change and the media of climate change. And again, social media companies have been trying to help. And that's something that we need to think about. So the climate is changing, but there are solutions. And, I don't know if any of you saw this, but this is the new Climate Science Information Centre that was put up on Facebook recently. And this is kind of promoted to people. And it was intended to connect people to factual and up-to-date climate information. So this is amazing. Facebook has finally shifted and agreed that we need to have proper climate science information and that people need to have up-to-date factual information as well. And this came from kind of widespread concern from scientists and politicians about the rampant spread of misinformation on the platform. And this is again because Facebook's algorithms if you've got a climate scientist writing a very factual, post about climate change and using lots of climate language, compared to someone who says that it's a lie, it's a breakdown, they're all just trying to change, they're trying to scare you. You have to think to yourself, which one is the algorithm going to share more? And it's going to be the one that's more accessible to read. It's going to be the one that's potentially more scary, because people tend to share things out of fear, and it's not going to be the up-to-date factual one. So Facebook trying to help is really important and a really positive step to changing this. And we have to be, we have to keep this pressure going on to social media to ensure that they can continue to share this about. So Facebook admits climate misinformation on its platform is a rampant problem, but is only taking half measures to stop it, says a joint statement from groups including Greenpeace, Friends of Earth, and the Sierra Club. So again, you've got this moment where it's like, perfect, Facebook has now got this climate science information center, we can sit back, we can sit easy, but that's not the point. As always, we have to keep pressure and keep these companies and say, look, we cannot have misinformation, especially not about climate change, especially not about something that affects everyone on this earth. You really need to step up and actively fight against this. We don't want people who could potentially be a really positive force in climate change to suddenly be fooled and be sharing misinformation around. That's not something that we want. So again, the pressure on these social media companies needs to kind of be focused. So now we've got a bit more of a kind of tech look here, which kind of looks at how misinformation is spread on social media. And you can see here on the right hand side, if you can't see it, it's got climate change denial, which is in the yellow. And then you've got, kind of politics and media as well, and they all kind of mix together. And then you've got pro-environmental and climate science, which is kind of the green, and then the blue is kind of sort of like different media. And what it does is they connect to each other, but it's spread, it spreads all the way to the left and all the way to the right, and that's kind of the big problem. So a coalition of environmental groups hired analysts, and they tried to track climate denial conversations on Twitter, and found specific groups of people responsible for spreading most of the disinformation. So there are specific people out there who want to spread climate misinformation. That is their aim. That's what they do. They engage in it and they spread it on quite often. And on average, they observed that the climate denial groups were 4 times louder, and in relative group size. And what that means is that people who are climate denialists, they really shout out about it. I think it's again because at this stage in where we are, especially when we know that climate change exists, we kind of ignore people like this. We don't really engage with them. We kind of go, well, you don't care, so there's no point in us having to deal with you, which is a bit of a problem, because we kind of want to ensure that these people are engaged with, that they're talked about, and their science debunked. So when they say something that's very outlandish, you kind of want to respond with factual information, or kind of engage them in a positive conversation, which is like, why do you believe this? But there's also the problem that they're quite loud on social media, which that means their presence is bigger than people who, scientists who are spreading factual information. And it's kind of thinking again, how can we help social media companies stop this? How can we work through science and technology to try and really manage this online? And that's a really important question. So I've also put on about QAnon. This is a group that is, kind of focusing on very weird things, anti-science. And what these climate deniers spread is also, quite anti-science. They kind of disprove COVID-19 exists. So they kind of, and, they're very much against different political situations. But the one problem is you can actually see climate deniers and denying that COVID-19 exists kind of met in the middle. So again, this is the denial, this lack of understanding in science really is the big problem that we have. And again, that's something that we need to think about, is how can we really make science accessible for people who don't agree, can't understand that climate change exists. And they kind of use certain hashtags, and they kind of talk to each other as well. And they also get celebrities and things about that. And that's a really big point that we need to think about, is that they also have celebrities and young people on their side. So Naomi Sebit, who is kind of known as the conservative version of Greta Thunberg. She became one of the key influences in the climate denial conversation. So more recently, I kind of tweets have gone down to the COVID-19 pandemic as well, and other political agreements and things like that. And there's lots of conspiracies around her. So we kind of, again, have people who prop up, you know, conservative or people opposing Greta Thunberg or opposing scientists. And that's something we need to think about as well. Who do they pop up? So we've been talking about denial quite rampantly throughout, but one of the main problems that is happening right now is delaying. And this is something that has been sort of widespread at the moment. The idea that we, rather than completely deny, you can't, you know, there's so much factual information out there, you're just going to delay, you know, delay and say, we don't need to worry about it. Okay, climate change might be an issue far in the future, but right now we don't need to worry about it. And that is where the kind of big problem comes from this. So this is kind of what we need to deal with right now. So we've got lots of different sort of discourses of climate delay as we talk about them. And this is the idea, again, of kind of thinking what's going on here. So one of the discourses of climate delay is that we've got the sort of individualism. So kind of the idea that we just deal with ourselves, and we kind of don't need to worry about it. And we need to first redirect responsibility. So we need to kind of put the responsibility to deal with this on someone else. And that's something that a lot of people will do, especially if you live in a country that isn't so affected by climate change. You're more likely to say, okay, well, this country needs to deal with it first, then I will. And that's a bit of a problem. Then you have those people who just surrender. It's kind of very like negative, kind of like doomism. Well, there's nothing we can do now. Climate change has happened. That we might as well just let it happen. Change is impossible, so we'll just move on. That's a huge problem, especially if people just give up. We've been told that we have, you know, lots of different, we have a time limit, but we are slowly working towards that. We have a lot of education, scientists are working, there's been a lot of technological innovation, people coming up with new ideas. That's what we need, not people saying, well, I'm just going to surrender to it. That's kind of one of the problems. Then we've got people that kind of emphasize the downside. So these are people that kind of talk about the idea that climate change policies will be a problem for people, they'll affect the poor. There's lots of different types of people who will just say, oh, you know, there are downsides to climate change. It'll be more expensive. You know, electric cars are more expensive. And we need to start thinking about how we can interact with people who think about this. And then we've got non-transformative solutions. This is the idea that people just want to talk about it. And the kind of, there's no action for this, or they want to focus on fossil fuel companies and kind of that they'll be the solutions to the future, and then we can rely on them to not break down and hurt the earth. It's kind of the idea that, oh, I don't need to do anything because in the future technology will solve it all. We're going to be like Star Trek, and we can live on the moon potentially, is another one that people talk about. A lot of people say, okay, well, there's no worry now. Hopefully we can create technology so we can live on another planet. And again, these are types of things where they just kind of sit back and let things happen. Kind of, instead of surrendering, it's more a positive surrender that they don't need to do anything. So these are really big issues. And this is kind of the new delay tactics that people are talking about. And these are the kinds of things that we really need to deal with in terms of climate. So climate denial. So we kind of want to counter these and think to ourselves, how can we deal with these in, you know, more specific ways and different discourses. So I'm going to go through some responses that we can do, and these are the responses that you can do if your friends talk about them, your family members, even on social media. A lot of people, again, agree that we shouldn't respond to people on social media when they share such rampant misinformation. But again, we do need to kind of engage people in conversation, I think, now, especially from what we've learned earlier, which is, again, the idea that people who climate denials, they kind of have big issues in that they're louder than the scientists, and they spread their stuff more widely. And there's been lots of evidence that sort of false news or misinformation spreads much more quickly than factual scientific fact. And that's because, again, it's emotional. It's trying to get you emotional. There isn't much need to agree with scientific fact. So again, we have these types of obstacles that we have to deal with. And that's something that we really need to focus on. So here's the sort of first question, which is ultimately it's individuals and consumers who are responsible for taking action. Again, this is the idea that it's just up to us. It's just up to the individuals to deal with everything. And that's a bit of a problem. And again, there are 100 companies that are responsible for kind of about 71% of all greenhouse gas emissions. So we kind of need to work together to deal with these issues. And that's something that is very essential. So again, don't just blame individuals and say, well, because you haven't done this, you are directly causing climate breakdown. There's a to and fro. Yes, as individuals, we need to be aware of the world. We need to think about our types, or what we're eating, where the climate, our carbon footprint. We do need to take a little bit of responsibility, but it isn't solely down to individuals. It's also big businesses as well. We just need to be a bit more conscientious about this. So this is something that I think will take time to do, because it is much easier once we've done our best and we've all become climate aware and we've all done, it's at that point we could say, right, well, we've done our responsibility. It's now up to you. And even if you haven't completely changed your life to the most climate change, person, you've got no carbon footprint, still, we do need to think about working with businesses and improving their greenhouse gas emissions as well. But what about China? So this question often happens online, and this is a really big question that a lot of people will struggle to deal with. And it really does pay to talk about this question. And the one thing is that a lot of people, they say, and this is kind of, if we go back to the question where it says the discourses of climate delay, and it's kind of, you've got the surrender or redirects responsibility. So at this point, what about China? It says, okay, rather than dealing with how much greenhouse gases UK is dealing with, we just focus on China and say that it's up to them. And until they change, sorry if you can hear my cat in the background, but we really focus on China. So every country could make a version of this argument, and that's the problem. Every country can then blame someone else, and then it becomes a blame game. So we can blame, China will say, well, what about the USA? And then the USA will say, what about China? And then China will say, okay, what about Russia? And then Russia, and it will just go through until we've kind of exhausted all of our options. And this isn't a good point to do. We all are aware that these things exist, and this is something that we need to really think about and how we can manage. And we also need to think about the fact that, we do live in the UK and we are a very technologically and economically advanced nation. We can take action, and we can take action much more easier than other nations as well. We've got all sorts of, we can talk to our MPs and say that we're really concerned about this. This is something that we really want to deal with. We can do policies, we can do campaigns online. We've got the tools at our disposal. And we also, and I think a lot of people forget, is that we have historical responsibility. As we was a country that did pollute a lot in the 19th century, and we did have this, we were the big country that went through the sort of kind of polluted and the fossil fuels and the coal and all of those things. And we did, have this historical responsibility. So again, when people say, what about China? What they are really saying is, I don't want to deal with it right now. Can we blame another country? When we can all take kind of pressure our own country to deal with this and be more positive. We've already declared a climate emergency and set ambitious targets. Again, if we're thinking about this and we're thinking, okay, which one have they done here? So we've already declared a climate emergency. So kind of surrendering, maybe kind of just saying redirecting responsibility. Yeah, so the idea that everything's done, we've set ambitious targets, we have the Paris Agreement. Why are we still going on about this? What is the point? There are more important things to worry about. And this is, again, redirecting responsibility or kind of pushing climate change off the agenda. And that's happening quite recently as well. where people are more worried about other things. Maybe, you know, COVID-19 is a pandemic going on, so people are more likely to focus on that. But there are other ways to talk about this. And again, one of the things we need to say is targets are not policies. So you can say, I'm going to have an ambitious target, but you need to put them in. This is a bit of political literacy. When people agree to an international agreement, they need to then put that international agreement into domestic law. So then to transform those targets into policies, which they will say, this is how we're going to achieve this policy. It's in our law. This is what we're going to do. We're going to change things, not just sign a contract and say, yes, right, we're done now, ambitious targets. And, you know, it is noted that we are quite bad at meeting environmental targets. So it's amounts that, you know, has missed every single one of the 2010 IHG goals to protect wildlife and ecosystems. So again, we kind of really need to focus on saying that we're going to do targets and then making literal practical examples of how we're going to do it. We don't just want our politicians and the people who say, okay, we're going to do it to sign something. We want them to actually actively go out and do that. And also work with organizations as well, and young people, even more so. You know, there's been a massive shift. Everyone's interested in climate change. They're more aware, they're more educated, they understand the science. Now is the time to kind of work together with our politicians and with each other to kind of make this a bit clear. And that's something that we really want at the moment. Taking action on climate change will generate huge social costs. The most vulnerable people in our society will suffer from the most increased taxation. Right, and this is a clear example of emphasizing downsides. So what did I mention before? This is the problem of saying, right, well, this is an issue. We are not, when we try and push for climate change, it's going to cost vulnerable people more. So because we might have to increase taxation, and the poorer people in society will have to pay more. And this is again spread online, and this is a climate denial tactic. And it's again the idea that, you know, climate change will cost us if we try and fix it, because it's going to take money, it's going to take time. But a lot of people actually say this is kind of a straw man argument, again, which is, and a straw man argument is misrepresenting someone's position to make it easier to attack. So again, this is the idea of saying that because you want to fix climate change, you actually want to cause problems with society, which is nowhere near what people want. But it's misrepresenting someone's position and then making it easier to attack. So when people talk about climate change, people say, okay, how are you going to deal with that? Someone will say, oh, we could potentially increase taxation, and then that would cause that would cause positive reactions. And they say, right, well, you don't like poor people. And that's the problem at the moment. We really want to try to make sure this argument isn't taken at face value. What we want to do with climate change is make it, ensure that in the future, everyone can continue to live on this earth as normal. We want to make sure that the devastating weather effects aren't going to attack. We want to make sure that food is still going to be there in the future. We want to make sure that our oceans are clean, that there's not plastic buildup everywhere, that our health is good. And just by, this quote, people shift the blame, and they shift it and say, well, I'm not going to listen to you because you don't have any idea about how this will affect people. And that's the problem. So again, when we have this kind of response, we want to talk about, no, what we want to do is what I said before, X, Y, and Z. Clean up plastic, clean up our oceans, make sure we have food that can last long, make sure that we live in a habitable, good earth. These are the things we want to focus on, not the other sides. And that's a really big point of reference that we need to remind ourselves. And again, it is working with everyone. It is making sure that we're accessible, that we're talking to all different people around the world, loads of different people across the UK, to make sure that, what we do put in place doesn't harm people. But at the end of the day, our goals are to ensure that this earth is still there in the future, and that no one is being hurt by climate change. And that's something we need to focus on. It's too late to prevent catastrophic climate change, and we should get ready to adapt or die. And again, I'm going to go back to my delay is the new denial, and this is surrender. All right, this is the clear surrendering here at this point. Literally saying to ourselves that there's no point in dealing with it. There's no point trying to adapt, because which it's just going to be a problem. And this is a huge problem. This is a really negative point to talk about and to force onto people as if there is no solutions that are being talked about. I imagine there's so much positivity around climate change at the moment. You know, we're talking about it now. We're at a Youth Climate Action Summit. You know, everyone is talking about it and educating. So to have this thrown at you is a real big problem. And a lot of people get a bit shocked when they see this. They're like, oh, I don't really know how to deal with this. That's a really negative point. So how can you talk to someone? You can talk about, yes, the moral idea, like, you know, we aren't even the most affected by climate change. We have to admit that all over the world people are being affected by it, and by just giving up, you're just ignoring that those people have lives, and just by closing your eyes, you're again ignoring these people that are kind of dealing with these issues. So what you really want to do is go, okay, let's talk about maybe positive ways that you can do that make a difference. So again, if we talk about, we break it down. When we talk about climate change, it's so big, it's so wide, there's so much to talk about, there's so many issues that come with it. What you really want to do with someone like this is really break it down to them and say, okay, you're scared, let's see what we can do. What can you do as an individual that might help? And it could be simple things, literally something like buying a reusable water bottle, not using plastic straws, taking a fabric bag when you go to shop, all these sustainable things, not using plastic as much. Even going and volunteering to help clean up a beach once in a while. All these are really positive things that you can do, and they make a difference. And you really want to focus on the individual things that you can do if someone reacts to this, because what they're saying is there's a lot going on and I don't know how to deal with it. So you really want to calm it down and say there are positive things that we can do. And then we can talk about, you know, different groups they can join, different ways they can be helpful, and put them on a positive path of engaging again with climate change, and saying, look, such positivity with this campaign and what we're trying to do, please be a part of it, don't just close your eyes. So that's a really something that we want to think about. The next point I want again to think about is who should stop the spread of misinformation and disinformation. And I kind of hinted about this a little bit before, and we've kind of been, you know, we've been talking about that these are all going to be online, these sort of questions and statements. They're more, these are the ones that climate denialists and climate delayists all kind of talk about. And I've kind of gone through the steps that you can kind of battle against these questions and statements and kind of, you know, give a positive spin onto them. But we need to again think about the fact, going back, misinformation and disinformation is online. And the big question, and a debate you can have in your classes, and the debate you can have more widely as well, is really thinking about this. And you can be in each section, or you can be across. So what we've got on one side is our government. So should our government basically be in charge of the internet? And a lot of people will say no. They'll instantly say this is unacceptable. The internet is open access, and that's one of its positives. So there's no government intervention with that. So, but some people say, well, again, you know, we trust our government to make laws, we trust them to do all sorts of things, so why shouldn't they be in charge of the internet? So there's a kind of pro and con in this area. But again, you can really elaborate on these points here, and I would advise you all to research and again, have a little bit of a debate in class about this, and think about climate change denialism as well, and about why we are so worried about this, and why we really want climate change denial to get off social media. Are we putting more pressure on social media companies? This has definitely happened in almost the last couple of months, and the pandemic has actually made this a bigger focus, because everyone's at home now, everyone's on their phones and laptops a bit more. So a lot more people are typing and reading, you know, they're on social media a lot more than they would be. So we need to start thinking, you know, the social media companies should take responsibility, and they have been, you know, saying this is misinformation. We talked about how Facebook has created a, you know, proper up-to-date scientific fact-checking. This is where you go if you want to talk about climate change. And they admitted that there was a spread of misinformation. Twitter have been doing a lot recently. Instagram have also been trying to battle it. So we've got lots of companies who are really trying hard to deal with this. So should we put the full onus on them? Should we say, well, it's just up to social media companies because it's online? Again, pro and con. And then again, I'd love to hear the debates and things about this, but ultimately it's not just social media companies. We are the consumers of these things, and we are the ones that are on them. So I think there's a bit of individual responsibility, and also should we trust social media companies to legislate against what we see? So there's another thing about freedom of kind of being able to see what you want and not have it filtered. And this idea that we should, we want to see what we see. So why should social media companies be the ones to decide what is misinformation, disinformation? Shouldn't that be our government, or shouldn't that be my judgment? So again, kind of in the middle. And then the last one is, again, individual responsibility. Should it be up to us to educate ourselves and basically say, I know what climate change is, I know that there's misinformation, disinformation. If other people don't, then they need to educate themselves. Again, pros and cons of this, but ultimately we really need to think, if this individual responsibility worked, then we wouldn't have people spreading misinformation online. We wouldn't have them all doing that, and there would be a bit of an issue there. So if that worked already, and again, with education, it takes time. We're in secondary school for a while, we're in primary school, then we have to go to university, or maybe we don't go to university. But at the end of the day, we're educating ourselves at home, we're reading books, we're doing everything that we can, and it just takes a lot of time. So again, what I think, my personal view, and again, I'd love to hear people's thoughts if you have a debate about this, but I think is a mixture of everyone. I don't think you can just have one and look to one sort of area and say, well, that's it. I think you really need to go a bit broad with this. And I think that's something that we need to think about. Right, going to go for a bit of practical skills now. We've talked a lot about how to deal with climate denialism, how to deal with all these things, and now we kind of want to go to the practical skills of just reviewing sort of information before you share it. And again, what you want to do is you want to do reputation, evidence, verification, intent, emotions, and weigh it up. So we've got review and practice. The Greenpeace activist gets arm bitten off after hugging a white shark, right? This is the evidence. This is a real story that was on the internet that I found when I was looking up, and that's kind of the first thing we want to do. So the evidence is that someone had their arm bitten off by a shark, and he was a Greenpeace activist. So again, it's the same idea that people who are so in love with sort of dealing with climate change or really animal friendly, they do silly things. First, you want to think about the reputation. So as you can see here at the top, it's got the URL, it's got archive, right? That's immediately a big warning sign to me. Whereas, this isn't a real news site. This is an archive of something. Someone has created this themselves and then put it on. So that's a bit of a problem. It's not verified by any mainstream sites. Emotions. Again, if you disagreed with climate change, you would look at this as evidence to support your disagreement. You'd be like, oh, they're just all silly. They're just silly people. They don't really know what they're doing. I'm not really going to listen to much people. So your emotions, it would feed into you believing something. On the other side, you would look at this and get angry. You'd be like, oh, why has this person done this? It's so annoying. We're trying to promote us as not being silly and not hugging sharks. So again, you have emotions to think about. Verification. So again, you can look at this picture and you need to think to yourself, where has this picture come from? Can I find if this picture actually is what the title says it is, or is there something else going on here? Then you need to think about the intent. So why would someone write this, and why would they promote it as he hugs the shark? What is the point? What is the intent after this article? Is it to just, is it for entertainment? Is it to actually tell us what this happens? Is it a warning? What is the point of this? And then you need to weigh it up. You need to look at all of your evidence together and you need to go, right, this is what I believe. And that's kind of what you should go through each time you see something on social media, each time you have a post, every time you see an online article, you kind of need to go through all these steps. And you've got the practical tips here. So again, what I said before, pay attention to the URL and domain. You can reverse image search and then you can engage in a conversation. So pay attention to the domain. Again, archive, I can't even read the rest, but that's something, that's a big warning sign. You kind of want to talk about the fact that established news organizations have their own domains and have a standard look, whereas ones that end in, just doesn't even end in a com, that's a really big problem. And this is something that we need to think about. Then you need to reverse image search. So if you're a bit worried, you're like, oh, this hasn't come from a mainstream site, then you need to think to yourself, how can I reverse image search this? And this is through kind of right-clicking on the image and choosing to search Google for it. If the image has appeared on a lot of stories on many different topics, then it's a good chance it's not actually an image of what it says in the first story. So I typed off Greenpeace shark arm into Google Images, and then immediately had Snopes.com. I had fake news. So all of this immediately is a warning sign. So I was already told straight away, right, I can't trust this. And Snopes is a fact-checking organization as well. So that's something a bit there. And the last bit you want to do is engage in a conversation. So if someone's sharing something, even though it might be a bit uncomfortable, you really just want to kind of tell them, let's have a conversation. Why do you believe in this? What's going on? Let's have a positive communication at the moment. And the last bit that I kind of want to do before we move on to the hackathon element and the challenge that I'm going to set schools is to look out for fact-checking guides. A lot of time when we see climate denialism or climate change or big stories like the Greenpeace who had his arm apparently eaten because he hugged a shark, it wasn't true. That was because Snopes, which is the oldest and largest fact-checking organization, kind of went through it and found all the evidence. And then you've got Full Fact, which is the main fact-checking organization in the UK. They do really deep research and verify facts reported on media. And you can also search for a specific topic or stories to get facts. Snopes is really good as well for that. And then First Draft is also good because it's got different languages and it gives you guidance on how to spot misinformation as well as up-to-date myth busting. So that's something as well to kind of guide people. So if you want to have a good positive conversation with someone and they've shared something, maybe your first step would be to fact check it using one of these sites and go back to them and say, hey, maybe on a private message, let's have a conversation about this. Let's go through why you've believed this and why these sites say that isn't wrong, why it's wrong. And that's just an easy way to do that. So I'm going to kind of end the last sort of 15 minutes on a climate change you should be doing in schools, and I'd really promote doing this because this is taking talk and putting it into action, right? This is everything that I've talked to today, and we'd really love if schools could come together and do a few climate change hackathons. So we want you to run a hackathon in your school, and this is where people come together to collectively work together and hack an issue. So it was taken from the old when hackers would sit together and they would try and solve a technology issue. We've tried to move that and made it to a climate change and focusing on climate change issues. So the big question today is, how can we educate people to stop believing in climate change conspiracy theories and stop believing in these sort of climate change, like really negative theories? How can we educate them? What can we do? And that's kind of the big question today that we want you to think about. So first step when you want to deal with this is you want to split your class into groups, and then each group will have a sheet of paper in the middle, and then on this sheet you will have about 10-15 minutes depending on how big your classes are, and you have to write down every barrier stopping you from finding a solution to the question. So that is literally sitting down and thinking to yourself, what are the negatives? What is stopping me from achieving my goal? What is stopping me or stopping anyone from educating people to stop believing in climate change? So you want to start off with your barriers first. So for example, COVID-19, right? COVID-19 is kind of one of the big barriers right now to stop educating people because everyone's online, everyone's really focused on the pandemic. There's lots of misinformation flying out from everywhere, so it's harder to deal with. So you would say COVID-19, then and that would be one of your big barriers. And it could be small barriers as well. So it could be that people, politicians don't listen to young people as much. So maybe you could think, okay, how can I change that as well? So there are lots of barriers, and you want to get the negatives out of the way first. So that would be your first step to doing this hackathon, is figuring out the barriers, kind of talking about this question and setting up for a hackathon. The next is the sharing bit. So each group should share the main barriers that they came up with to answer the question, and then kind of look at what you've discussed and then feed back some answers from each group. So you kind of want to make sure that you've got all your main barriers, everyone's in different groups, and then you feed back to each other what are the main barriers that you came up with. It's kind of the idea of sharing. This is what people do when they create policies in government and try to deal with climate change. They would all sit and go, okay, what is stopping us? And let's have a discussion of how we can deal with each of these issues. So you're kind of replicating what people do when they're in government or kind of in the political arena. And so that's something that you want to do as well. And then you want to really move on to this. And this is where you can get your thoughts down. So at this point, you'll want to do, how can we educate people to stop believing in climate change conspiracy theories? You'd have this on the board, and then for 5 minutes, everyone needs to sit down in complete silence and write down every solution and idea to tackle this question. So how can we educate people to stop believing in climate change conspiracies? And your solution could be a business idea, a policy solution, a tech solution, or something else. There are no wrong solutions. So you can do this. We've done this before with different schools, and it's been really amazing. Is people take sticky notes and they would just write a quick sentence, which means their ideas. So if we were going to educate people to stop believing in climate change conspiracies, what we'd first have to do is potentially work with social media companies. So you would put that down as working with social media companies to come up with innovative ideas. So I think one of the solutions people had is having a TikTok campaign, because there's so many, people who really love TikTok and they want to engage with it. And more recently, TikTok has been putting out educational TikTok. So the idea of just a quick 2-minute TikTok video to kind of run through why this is misinformation or why this is disinformation. And that's something that you can do, you can come up with. Or if you wanted a tech solution, when you're thinking about pollution or water or the ocean, dealing with those things, there was that really amazing 21-year-old who had the idea of creating something to take in all the plastic in the ocean, and he got that funded. So he came up with a really big tech mechanical sort of way of trying to deal with the plastic. I think some scientists in America have come up with the idea of sort of kind of like dealing with seaweed. So there's lots of things that you can do. You just need to think, how can I relate it to about conspiracy theories? How can I engage these people? So you want to think about your solution and really expand on it. And that's kind of what you do. There are no wrong solutions. You just want to get every thought that you have straight down onto a sticky note, and then you can discuss them with your group. Once you've got your solution, you need to action it. Okay. So as we live in a democracy, you would want to decide and vote on your favorite solution in your group. So everyone would come back and they would, have their sticky notes, and then they would work together and say, okay, right, let's talk about why I think that my solution is the best one. So if your solution was to do a TikTok campaign, then you would argue against someone else who maybe wanted to kind of do a campaign in the school, and then you would work together to see which one you would prefer to do. And you would have to, a bit of debating here, a bit of conversation with each other. The next step would be to turn that solution into an action plan and think about, what do you need? So what do you need to make this into an action? So what that means is what sort of materials do you need? Who do you need? Where will your solution be done? And when do you plan on doing your plan? So what do you need? Well, if you're going to do the TikTok campaign, you would need a phone. You would need access to TikTok. You would potentially you could ask, so you would need your phone and access to TikTok. So that would be kind of the first steps. You might have more later on, but that would be the first step for me. Who should be involved? So that would be the group or the school. You could even get TikTok celebrities involved. You could send them a message saying, would you want to be involved with this campaign to talk about why there are misinformation about climate change? So again, you would think about who would you want to be involved and who would get the voice out first, and that's something you would think about. Then you need to think, where will your solution be done? So again, this is quite easy because it's a TikTok campaign. It can be done online, but then you can also have offline materials as well and do this with something else. So you could do like a protest and everyone could have their TikTok on. So again, it's about being really creative with your idea. And then the last one is, when do you plan on doing your plan? Essentially, that is a timeline. So that is thinking to yourself, okay, when am I going to do this? How am I going to do this? What is the plan for this? What is the timeline? And you want to think about all of these solutions when discussing this. So this is your chance to really create a good action plan and come together to think about this. So again, what do you need? Who should be involved? Where will your solution be done? And what do you plan on doing your plan? Last one is, again, sharing your solution. So we're back to this again. So now that you've created your plan to solve the question on how can we educate people to stop believing in climate change conspiracy theories, you will present to your class. So again, you would put students into groups and all of you will come back and then you will present your solution to everyone. And this is a good chance. It's kind of like putting yourself in the Shark Tank and kind of letting people see your ideas. And that means that you've actively thought of a solution and you're gonna run with it. And then again, you can make this a bit bigger and have people vote on the best solution, and then you would action that solution. So if someone came up with the TikTok challenge and they won, then you would go, right, okay, that's what we're gonna do. So everyone would work together in that class to kind of do that campaign and go further with it. And again, you've got presents, you could go further, you could maybe have 5-minute limits, they have to pitch their ideas, you can invite people to come and just, they can be the voters, you can include people from, WWF or from whoever you want, whoever's in your local environment, whoever's near your school, you can invite them, ask them to come see your solution. So there's lots of good options that you have here. And that's something that we want to think about when doing this. So, lastly, we'd love for you to share your solutions on social media using the hashtag Youth Climate Summit 2020, and then and at in all these people. So Climate Action Plan, WWF.UK and Shout Out UK, because we really want to see what your solutions are to this. I'd really love to see some really innovative, creative solutions for this. So that would be amazing if we could do that. This is, and while we're on social media, make sure to tag us in Shout Out UK and WWF and the Global Action Plan. And so really be as creative as possible with this. There is no silly solution. And it's the best way when we talk about dealing with media literacy and dealing with misinformation and dealing with disinformation, we always just kind of have a talking point. So what this is doing is making sure that you have an action plan and you can actively get involved with all the campaigns that are going on currently in the world around this, and making sure that you change people's opinions and change people's misinformed ideas and really run into it. And that's something that we would love to see and hear about. And and post on social media. Again, thank you for coming to this session. If you would like to follow Shout Out UK, our socials are below. But this has been really, really great to talk to everyone. And if you've got any questions or anything that you want to ask me, I have a little bit of time now to run through anything. But if not, it's been amazing to talk to all of you. So thank you very much. And I think I will leave it there if we are finished right now. Perfect. If we've got a couple of questions, I'm more than happy to answer them. Social media companies end up being deciders of the truth if they label posts, but they're also responsible for the spread of disinformation. Shouldn't they be regulated more? That's a really interesting question. It's kind of what I hinted at before, is why should we trust social media companies to be regulators? They don't have any experience in regulating anything, really. And now they're suddenly being told that they have to regulate everything. So there's no policy or framework for them to work off. So again, that's why the idea that maybe social media companies should work with governments and people to come up with a framework of what they focus on. So I think that's a really, really interesting question. How can I call out climate deniers without opening up an online argument? Yes, that is one that I've kind of hinted at throughout. I think it's about not humiliating them. Oftentimes when you see arguments, it's all public. I think if you could try and make it like a DM, a direct message to them, or just say, hey, I just want to direct you to this. This is a different opinion to what you've espoused. I just thought, I'd try and give you another side of the argument. And I think that's a really good point to think about. It's just trying to calm them down, because they might already be on edge. But if you just say, hey, this is an alternative opinion, I'm just going to leave this here if you'd like to have a look. If you want to know more, I can I'm going to direct message you and we can have a bit of a chat. But really, you don't want to get in an argument, you just want to give an alternative view. So that's what I would say to that, is really just give another view. How can we make 4 times as much noise as the climate deniers are making? I think really it's about being accessible, I think, and really promoting things in an easy to understand way. I think a lot of time we have to make sure that our language is accessible to everyone when we're on social media. So a lot of times people will post links to articles that people, it takes 2 minutes, 3 minutes to read, but it's quite complicated, and people are like, oh, I don't really understand what they're talking about, because they have no climate change education. So you really want to try and think to yourself, how can I share things in a really accessible way so that everyone understands, and they don't have to have the same education as me, and it's really on point, that they can just see something and they can understand it. How can I call out climate deniers? We've kind of discussed that one. So yeah, the online arguments, the last ones. We've got 1 minute, and I'm just going to kind of leave you on this and say that ultimately the best thing you can do is just give them another view. You're not there to fight with them, you're just there to give an alternative view. So if you just want to go on and post something and say, if you're interested, this is a different opinion to yours, I'm going to leave this here. And that is all you really need to do. You just need to make it clear to people there are alternative views to what these people are saying. And that's all you need to do. Thank you for these questions. They're really, really interesting. And again, if you want to know more, we do lots of media literacy. So I'm going to leave you with that. And again, thank you for these questions. I've got my 1 minute warning. Thank you.